Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on October 7, 2025. It is day 1,322 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck, I think maybe what we could title today's show is Ukraine, Unleashed and Leashed. This, of course, has something to do with Tomahawk missiles that may or may not be coming from the United States and Ukraine's own long-range innovations.
Yeah, to me, I'm a little Tomahawk neutral, although that may or may not resonate with people. Of course, the White House is being rather coy about whether or not it will supply Tomahawk TLAM, tactical land attack missiles to Ukraine. I have a hunch that they are, and they will. They have been increasing arms flights to Poland, and those weapons are making their way into Ukraine. But as Alan and I have been reporting for quite a long while, Ukraine is making its own long-range weapons, and the latest is what has been called a cheeked-up Neptune, and Alan and I will be releasing one of those infographics after the show. But Ukraine has created a number of indigenously produced long-range weapons, and one of their latest is the FP1, and we just came out with an infographic on that. This has a 1,500-mile range. It's almost the anti-Tomahawk. It runs on a two-cylinder air-aspirated piston engine, but it can deliver 125 kilograms of explosives up to 1,600 kilometers, Alan, which is kind of the low end of what a Tomahawk can do. And they produce 100 of them a month, and they cost $5,000, not $5 million.
Right. I was reading the graphic about the FP1, and again, this is Ukraine designing the long-range missiles they need depending on the targets they want to hit. So these are refineries deep inside Russia. Ukraine has now struck 16 of the 38 top refineries inside Russia. And Ukraine's also striking thermal power plants. Ukraine blacked out Belgorod, and Belgorod's quite close to the Ukrainian border. But the important thing is that Ukraine took a shot at the power and blacked out a major Russian city.
Вот так сегодня звучит Белгород. Это звук мобильных генераторов.
And of course, this is just a bit of return to sender. As we know, and it was especially last year at this time, the Russians were extensively targeting Ukrainian power plants in hopes, and they didn't actually pull it off, but making it a cold, bleak winter for Ukraine. When we're talking about the Tomahawks, etc., Ukraine has a number of Western cruise missile systems. They've got the Storm Shadow. They have other cruise missiles as well. They have their own analogs with the Neptune, which was originally it was an anti-ship missile. They designed that. But there's a thing that we see going on. When Ukraine does use something like a Storm Shadow, it is always preceded by these lower quality, lower performance drones. One of the reasons is all of the Russian air defense systems are descended from these Soviet systems, and many of them were built to intercept Tomahawks. Low altitude, but here's the key thing, high transonic. So coming in at 500 or 600 miles an hour. And we've seen that these Russian systems, they don't do so well against something coming in at 70 feet at 55 miles an hour. So there's something to be learned here.
Yeah, and it's Ukraine that is learning that something just about every day. So Ukraine now has three versions of the Neptune. The original Neptune that was delivered to them that they modified. Then what's called a long Neptune that was designed to, I think, increase its range. And now what I'm going to call the chubby Neptune, and this is because of what it looks like with apparent added fuel tanks. And again, it is Ukraine clearly designing long range missiles for specific targets, depending on what that range is. So they have a lot of flexibility just with Neptunes.
They really do, and it's interesting that the United States is now talking about giving them Tomahawks, which is a capability that they over the last 3 years have pretty much developed by themselves. We don't know the exact performance capabilities of the Chubby Neptune, and it's just occurred to me that Thomas will be putting that infographic into the show as we're talking about it now. These bulges here, we are fairly certain that these are conformal fuel tanks, which is fancy word for that bulge is full of fuel. Because the Neptune, it has a disposable solid rocket engine on its tail that'll get it out of the launch tube and get it up to speed so that its turbojet cruise engine can fire. We are talking something with, I would say, the range of this new Chubby Neptune. It's going to be approaching 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
We know that the long Neptune has a range of 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles. That's a long way, Alan. That'll take you from L.A. to San Jose. So that is a pretty long distance to be lobbing a cruise missile.
Yeah. So overnight, yesterday's overnight, Ukraine struck a refinery in Tyumen, which is at this point setting a new record for a Ukrainian long-range strike. It's so far from Ukraine that the Russians first thought these drones must have been launched locally, but apparently they weren't.
Yeah, and to our Russian listening guests, you're not wrong because a lot of those drones are launched locally. You've got another problem, and frequently Ukrainians will use deeply inserted special operations forces and patriots to launch these missiles to target your air defense systems as the other systems arrive. But one of the great things that we see these drone strikes on refineries and high value industrial targets, and we applaud that. But I'd like everyone to remember what you're seeing is an air defense chess game, because every time they hit a target 1,000 miles away, it forces the Russians to move around their air defense systems. And the more air defense systems they are forced to move into Siberia or the Russian Far East, the farther they are from contributing to the war in Ukraine. And it's having an effect. Somewhere between 25 and 30% of Russia's air defense capability has been attrited. Now, that's not a huge number, but hey, you don't want to, that's as much as you pay in income tax, right? So it's starting to get there.
Well, it also means Russia is now challenged with where to find the air defense systems to move around. I believe they've repositioned some air defense from as far away as Vladivostok. They've brought it west. They may be as far west as Kursk. I don't know exactly where it ended up, but Russia has fewer and fewer air defense systems at its disposal. They need them in Crimea, for example.
Absolutely. They just hit the Theodosian transport facility today. This was a major unloading point where refined petroleum products could come in, land in Crimea, and be transshipped onto rail cars, road transport, etc. That's important because that fuel from that location is supposed to go up north and feed the Russian troops in Kherson Oblast, around Melitopol, etc., their entire southern arc. These attacks are just going to continue And another thing to bear in mind, you have a refinery and it gets hit. There was an air defense battle there, right? So the Russians will shoot down something like 20, 30% of the incoming drones. That means they've expended 20 to 30, maybe 40, even 50% of their ammunition. So every hit target becomes a weaker target, and they're going to get hit again. And have a good evening in Crimea, lads. We'll see what happens on our next show.
Yeah, that fire at Feodosia, the oil port and depot, has burned for a couple of days, and the smoke is visible from space. It is a big fire that's getting bigger. So one other reason I thought about Ukraine as leashed and unleashed. When we get to the maps today, you will see what an unleashed Ukraine is able to accomplish on the zero line. But the Tomahawks that are under discussion and may or may not be on the way from the United States are being delivered with restrictions. And this is no different than the Biden administration's decision to finally give ATACMS to Ukraine. They didn't come free. They came with a leash. And if the Tomahawks reach Ukraine, they're going to be on a leash.
Well, and again, maybe this isn't as bad as we think. Look, it's not good. I'd rather you give somebody a hammer, let them hammer all the nails they can reach. But I would say this, to mitigate this, look, the Ukrainians have indigenously designed weapons that can hit targets at 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 miles, rather. So we're talking the distance between Kansas City and Ocean City. Okay, that's a significant thing. Now, Ukraine needs everything. So giving them Tomahawks is good, and whatever targets they can address. And remember, the Russian air defense systems were made to fight the Tomahawk. And we're going to see them used the way the United States doesn't use them. In fact, no other country does this, with layered drone attacks with expendable drones to deplete the air defense systems, electronic warfare, etc. If there's something good about the Tomahawk, it arrives with a big explosion. It's got 500-pound warhead. So to put that, if you're in a 4-story office building, you're vaporized. So that's what a 500-pound charge will do. And hey, have fun with the Tomahawks, lad.
The thing that bothered me about the talk of restrictions on how Ukraine might use the Tomahawk missiles, Trump himself said he doesn't want escalation. So this echoes the whole argument that Jake Sullivan made to President Biden when Biden finally decided, yes, we can deliver ATACMS. This fear of escalation is a false fear, and it is exactly the false fear that Russia wants to put into the minds of decision makers in Washington.
Absolutely. And we talk about these Tomahawks coming with restrictions. It isn't like they're going to use Tomahawks against apartment buildings in Moscow. That's the way Putin fights this war. Ukraine does not have an abundance of these long-range weapons, and they also have seen clearly to the root of the problem. Attack the energy infrastructure that supports Russia's war machine. And that's what these are going to be used for. But again, we just recently did a summary of the September drone campaign against Crimea. Every one of these drone attacks was this multivalent, articulate, planned for weeks, maybe even months, every attack with unmanned surface vessels releasing fiber optic drones to attack the sensors just at the time where the higher speed, heavier warhead drones were arriving. And when the field was thoroughly engaged, then came a Storm Shadow, or then came a Flamingo. I'm amazed at the ability of the Ukrainians to plan air battles, which is something they shouldn't know how to do, right? They only now have turboprop driven one or two, Saab AEW planes. That's the starter kit for AWACS. But they have done amazing things, Alan, as you and I have been watching them do for the last, when you said 1,000, we've been doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah, we have. Well, more evidence that Ukrainians are quick studies.
They are, absolutely. The brains of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. And, proved that you could use a Patriot air defense system to shoot down a supposedly hypersonic Russian missile.
I remember him saying nothing can stop this weapon.
Right. Well, to see Ukraine unleashed, you need to see Ukraine fully armed with everything that it needs on the zero line. It doesn't have everything it needs on the zero line. And yet there's a pretty good picture of Ukraine unleashed when we go to the latest maps from Pokrovsk. I'm looking at two maps, one from 5 October, the most recent from 7 October. And we should look at them in sequence, especially at that assembly of Russian forces that were supposedly going to be thrown into the Russian effort to take Pokrovsk.
Yeah, and is the sort of nub of what is going on with 21st century combined arms maneuver warfare. There is a stage at which you have to consolidate your forces, whether it is a SEAL platoon at its briefing, right? At some point, everybody's got to come together. And the Russians have found, and in that salient where we see the number of artillery strikes and drone strikes, wherever the Russians put their vehicles together, their people together, Ukraine is going to hit them, which means a couple of things converge. Really good tactical intelligence, overhead imagery, and the fact that that information is communicated in an extremely timely manner to your unmanned vehicle forces and your artillery. So they are taking advantage. Remember, all the things that have to come together on a battlefield. You got to get the geographical location. You want intelligence, what they are doing. You have to prioritize the targets, but time is a critical factor. Just knowing where somebody was, that's not any good. Knowing where they're going to be, bing. There's an interesting thing here also on this 7 October map. When we look at the fragments of that Russian salient, and shout out to all of the military experts who called that a massive Russian breakthrough. This is what's left of it. But there was a Russian attack in the southern fragment, and I noticed it went north. So they are still propelling these guys and have the ability to have them do something utterly counterproductive. It tells me that the northernmost fragment is likely in a lot of trouble. So you have these two separated fragments and one trying to link up with the other. To our Russian listening guests, if you're in these fragments, you need to go south, right? And I don't think you're going to make it. So I would actually advise you to surrender. But these guys have got to be in a really bad place now. They've been surrounded for at least 10 days.
Yeah.
15 days. It's been a long time.
Well, I suppose, maybe some of those Russian forces went north because they're looking for any way out of Dodge. Whether they go north, south, east, or west almost doesn't make any difference. And they should give up. Actually, Russian casualties around Pokrovsk in September surged by roughly 30%. And this is one of the reasons, and you're seeing the other reasons on that 7 October map.
Well, when we were talking, it was just a matter of a couple of months ago. We were talking about the 120,000 Russian troops that were inserted into the Pokrovsk area of operations. We now know, with the release of this Russian casualty document that Ukraine released just a couple of days ago, approximately 90,000 casualties simply in Pokrovsk. And to put that into perspective, That's twice the number of troops lost in 10 years of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Wow. To take one city that they haven't taken.
And I don't think they're going to, actually.
I don't think so either.
So it's interesting that Ukrainian intelligence put their hands on Russian reports of killed, wounded, missing in action, and a very it was Tartarogami, the OSINT guy who was formerly in the Ukrainian military. He did a very helpful breakdown of those numbers, actually separating them out by location in Ukraine. And it's interesting when you look at his numbers going from west to east, as you approach Pokrovsk, the number of missing in action goes up dramatically. So just south of Pokrovsk, 5,000. Outside of Pokrovsk itself, 15,000. And when you move farther east up outside Kostyantynivka, you're still seeing 6,500 missing in action. We don't know what that actually means. We don't know if these are wounded Russians who are going to die on the battlefield because they're not going to be retrieved by their Russian comrades. They probably aren't deserters. Some of them are probably held captive by Ukraine.
Right. And, the Russians will not adjust the numbers should someone be missing in action, later declared a prisoner of war. And if that happens, the Ukrainians will be quick to change the number because, face it, you have a Vatnik and you can trade him for Ukrainian POW. So Ukraine would look to rectify those numbers. But we know a couple of things that have been proven photographically. The Russians do not recover their dead on the battlefield. We know another thing, that many Russian commanders do not report killed in action. They do this for a number of reasons, but one of the most mortifying is they carry these guys on strength and they just pocket their pay and allowances. You can't think of anything more obscene than that. Well, there is something more obscene than that. Recent battle photographs that I've seen, there was an obstacle along the zero line. I believe this was in Pokrovsk, and there were a series of dragon's teeth. These are cement pyramids that are used as anti-vehicle barricades, and barbed wire. This was an obstacle put up by the Ukrainians. About 30 or 40 Russian dead were in a heap in front of this obstacle. Right? There are ways that you clear barbed wire. You use this thing called a Bangalore torpedo. It's just a big, long, skinny, thick piece of plastic explosive, and you slide it into the barbed wire. You can hook them together. So if you need 20 feet, anyway, that's what your engineers do. If you have 5 days of training, at which 3 of them were riding on a bus from Moscow, you get together in a big gaggle of people. Right? You are confused. You are a human. You are under stress. You group up with people as an instinct. That is a lethal response for a soldier. And these guys were killed in their dozens at this one obstacle. They'll never get out of this training loop. This is never going to be corrected for them. These guys are not soldiers.
Yeah, it's never going to be corrected. And, finding soldiers elsewhere around the world, like Cuba, apparently 25,000 Cuban soldiers are on their way to fight in Ukraine. So add that contingent to the North Koreans, and you see Russia must have a manpower problem that isn't quite evident yet to people watching the battlefield.
No, and what's interesting is, so we can see the problem with simply untrained civilians. One of the things I was going to say when we talked about that breakout attempt that was going north, I almost said, and I will now, These guys might not even have compasses, right? They might literally not know the difference between north and south, which, by the way, you get up in the morning and you go, that's east. And in the afternoon, you go, that's west. Okay, but I'm glad you brought up the North Koreans. Look, they were trained soldiers, right? These guys, you could say a lot of things about North Korea. You can't say their soldiers aren't tough, and you can't say they aren't trained. Cuba, likewise, had a history during the Cold War. Look, they were the Soviet proxy force. They were in Angola, they were in Namibia, they were in Mozambique, they were all over the world, right? So 25,000 Cubans are going to come into this. Are they going to change the balance of power? No, because they will be squandered just like the North Vietnamese were in Kursk.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the North Koreans were in Kursk.
Yeah. No, the Cubans are not going to change the balance of anything wherever they are deployed. So as we compare the 5 October to the 7 October map here around Pokrovsk, it's the number of Ukrainian attacks that is really a striking feature, especially of the 7 October map. There's no place around Pokrovsk where Ukraine isn't attacking.
Right. And, some of these are pretty significant. We are talking, 2.5, 3 kilometers into the zero line. So we're, a mile and a half. I'm going to go for my walk this afternoon. It's going to be a couple of miles. It's one thing for me to walk around the neighborhood. It's another thing for me to hump a 70-pound pack and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. So we can see on that 7 October map, they are penetrating to the west of the TO5 highway there, TO515, but also to the north. So they are pushing back the Russian forces that might hope to get to Kostianivka, and they are pushing back the second salient that reaches out, north of Pokrovsk. This doesn't bode well for surrounding and taking Pokrovsk. And I think I agree with you, Alan. I don't think we're going to see it happen this winter. I just don't.
I don't either. And by the way, speaking of winter, there's rain in the forecast for about the next week. Temperatures in the 50s and 40s through the days and nights, really all the way from Kharkiv to Odessa. Actually, some severe weather is predicted for Odessa overnight. Probably some coastal flooding involved with that. That's just a headache for the residents of Odessa. The other thing I think we should point out on this 7 October map, this assembly of Russian troops is under attack because of great Ukrainian teamwork. You are seeing the combination of reconnaissance drones with then FPV attack drones, probably some heavy Ukrainian drones laying mines, would be my guess, as well as artillery.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this a lot. It's so different that it bears repeating. The forward edge of the battle area used to be, maybe 800 meters, right? 400 meters on your side, 400 meters on the enemy side. In the line in the middle was sort of the zero line. That was the forward edge of the battle area. 400 meters being about the range that a good rifleman can kill another rifle. Now it's 20 kilometers at least. And when Alan and I were in Ukraine just recently, look, even farther than 20 kilometers, we saw Ukrainian roads absolutely draped with anti-drone netting. So that number might actually be 30, maybe even 50 kilometers from the zero line. And, the Russians, I don't know. Their logistics are suffering. We're seeing, motorcycles and the bread loaf Scooby-Doo vans. Look, these are not military vehicles, right? These Chinese Desert Cross, look, that's a junky four-wheeler right? These are not military vehicles. And they're not sufficient to carry the kind of loads that the military needs: ammunition, food, fuel, heavy items. And the Russian forces are suffering. All of these little components of a successful military operation, they're blinking out one by one.
And you can see them blinking out on that October 7 map around Pokrovsk. But let's move up to Chasiv Yar. And this is a fascinating, very focused map because of what the Russians attempted to do outside Chasiv Yar and when they attempted to do it.
Yeah, so this map is 6 October, and weather is a factor in military operations, just like it is in everything in life. The Russians actually must have planned this attack and waiting for this sort of weather, because they assembled. This is south of Chasiv Yar, in the city near the village of Predrichene. The goal was to get closer or possibly even reach Kostiantinivka. It didn't work. We see in the Russian casualty numbers, and again, every one of these is video confirmed. The Russians had lost 4 main battle tanks, 8 fighting vehicles, 2 BMDs, and 3 BMPs. So they got smoked. Now, the casualty numbers, we have to extrapolate a little bit, but just taking the vehicle crews and tripling them, or at least doubling them for the number of soldiers each one of these vehicles carries externally, and you always see Russians riding on top of their infantry fighting vehicles and their, air quotes, armored personnel carriers, because they are death traps. They are not armored. A 7.62 bullet that I could fire from my rifle will go right into it, and a 50 caliber bullet will go right from the front bumper to the back bumper, absolutely through it. So these guys ride on top, where they get hit by a drone and killed.
Yeah.
So this was another major defeat, and we're looking at 300 guys, most of a battalion, and this fight was over in about 3.5 hours. Alan, it isn't working.
Well, whoever planned this attack for the Russians, found these tanks somewhere behind the lines, brought them forward, because what Russia has been doing with its tanks is actually digging them in and using them primarily as artillery. And you haven't seen tanks or BMDs or BMPs in any Russian advance for, honestly, 6, 7, 8 weeks. So that, this assembly had to come from somewhere. Whoever planned it must have been terribly disappointed.
Well, there's the other thing, and you see these turtle tanks. So they take a tank, and it might even be a T-62, right? Back when Elvis was on the charts, President Kennedy, 1962, and you surround it in whatever you have at hand. But first of all, the situational awareness in a tank, it isn't very good. If you're the driver, you've got about 100 degrees of visibility out the front. If you're the commander, and you're in an M1 Abrams, you got television and thermal cameras. You can look all over the place. These guys cannot see anything. They cannot even traverse their main gun. You're just going to get hit by a drone. And everything they put on the roof or on the sides, Alan, it simply doesn't matter. The drone flies over. You have a charge this big that fires an explosively formed projectile, literally a piece of molten copper. It's almost in a plasma state, and it just goes right through the tank like there's nothing there. It sets off the ammunition carousel, and we've all seen Russian tankers get turned into astronauts. That's what happened to these guys. When you get these kind of numbers, 5 tanks and 11 IFVs blown up in 90 minutes of combat,
Yeah, it's great to see. Now, there's no question about that because you've also got to assume that Ukraine knew they were on the way. They were ready to meet them, and they did, and it was not only rainy, but it was an early evening that this attack took place.
You know what? I don't know the exact time of day, but let's say it was just a prototypical Russian attack. They roared into combat at 10:30 in the morning, right?
Sure.
It's the Russians have they do fight at night sometimes, but you need to be trained to fight at night.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they
of course, the days are growing shorter in Ukraine. Sunsets of around 5:30, 6 o'clock at the latest at the moment. So it's dusky by 4:30 or so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, if you're attacking at dusk, uh, you hope to eventuate some positive combat factors for yourself in the attack, and then you have to exploit your breakthroughs or whatever tactical developments. You have to exploit them at night. So it works great if you got a SEAL platoon because we never fight in the daylight, right? But it doesn't work so well if you got a bunch of guys that, the Soviet Union was never great on land navigation to begin with. One of the fundamental skills that a soldier needs: shoot, move, communicate. That includes navigate. They didn't teach anybody to navigate. Not even company level officers were taught land navigation. Believe me, if you've been in the Army for 5 days and find yourself in Ukraine, you haven't taken a land warfare and navigation module, believe me. And Alan, you're an outdoorsman. It takes a long time to become a good navigator in the
Yeah.
world. It
And,
does.
and you need to navigate in Ukraine, let me tell you.
Oh God, don't you ever. Yeah.
One thing that always strikes me when we're looking at your Chasiv Yar maps, Chuck, is how long Russia has attempted to get past Chasiv Yar into the outskirts of Kostyantynivka. It's been since May, June 2023. That is approximately when the Russians finally occupied Bakhmut.
Well, we knew and we estimated casualties back there, with some war college professors. Look, the casualties in the Bakhmut operation were approximately somewhere between 50 and 80,000 Russian dead in Bakhmut. And that was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So this may be a place where these numbers are astounding. Russia has sustained 1,150,000 casualties now. That's the consensus number. You may literally be looking at 250,000 Russian dead just in the Bakhmut area of operation, and they still haven't taken Chasiv Yar.
Right. I mean, it is remarkable. And let me remind listeners again of the window of time here. You have to go back to May 2023. That's when Prigozhin claimed to have taken Bakhmut. That's 2.25 years ago. So it has now taken Russia's more than 2 years to go 10 kilometers. And this has got to be something of a holdover effect of the destruction Ukraine inflicted on Russians in Bakhmut.
It's it's flabbergasting. So we're just talking about the Bakhmut area of operations, just in what we depict. Alan and I depict in these maps right here, that we're looking, conservatively at 250,000 Russian dead. When you say Russian dead after a casualty number, you just shrug. But that's half as many people as the United States lost in the totality of World War II. Just to take this city And as we pointed out, when they took Bakhmut, and we've reported, and we've been reporting for 2.5 years, you haven't taken Bakhmut if you haven't taken Chasiv Yar.
Yeah.
And it's not going to do you any good to get to Druzhkivka, where we were, or
Right.
Kramatorsk, where we were. As long as Chasiv Yar is in your rear, you can't do anything. I don't make up the military rules, folks. I just report on them. It's just a tactical fact.
Well, these are three of the fortress cities that Ukraine depends on defensively here in this theater of operations. So Kostyantynivka, Druzhkivka, and Kramatorsk. Chasiv Yar is just a village, but people also have to remember Chasiv Yar is on a height of land from which you overlook the rubble of the destroyed city of Bakhmut. It's that high. It is a natural fortress. Kostyantynivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, they are fortress cities. And we didn't get to Kostyantynivka, which is under heavy bombardment every single day. Unfortunately, Russia is doing to Kostyantynivka what it did to Bakhmut.
And this is just a little bit of local color, but I'd like to report on it. I know Alan will agree. Look, we spent a fair bit of time in Kramatorsk, and we also got down to Druzhkivka on a couple of different occasions. I want to tell you that life is going on in those cities. They are not acting like the wolf is at the door.
No.
Look, people are going to the supermarket, clothing stores are open, and I know I reported on this earlier, but I want to remind people I had one of the best hamburgers I ever had in my life in Kramatorsk. It was amazing. And, we spent a couple days there. I'm glad we did with our producer, Rostik. To see that level of, I don't know, Ukrainians stubbornly clinging to normal life.
Yeah. Look, until recently, you could take the train to Kramatorsk.
Yeah.
And the Russians unfortunately struck a passenger train just outside the station in Kramatorsk. And again, intentionally targeting civilians. I don't know if rail service to Kramatorsk has been restored or not, but my guess is you can still take the train to Kramatorsk.
Yeah, it was amazing, and there were other places just as close to the zero line where we also saw life carrying on. It was remarkable. It was remarkable. They're not going to defeat Ukraine. It isn't going to happen. Now, I still don't think the end of the war is imminent. I don't, but I think this winter may be the turning point, and we'll see how tough a winter it is. The tougher the winter is, the more benefit will come to the defenders, which are the Ukrainians. Remember, it's the Russians that are paying the freight on every one of these operations, right? They have to consolidate their forces and move them to the battlefield. That burns resources, time, the energy requirements of your individual soldier. And I just saw a thing the other day talking about, it was about in World War II, the numbers are 5,000 calories a day for a soldier in the field. And folks, that just keeps them flat and stable. They're not putting on weight. In fact, they're losing weight. And anyone listening to this who was in the military, when you're in the field, you're losing about a pound a day. It's simply the way it is. So we'll see how the Russians do this long, cold, miserable winter.
The other thing worth comparing Bakhmut and Pokrovsk, we know the massive casualties that Russia suffered in order to take Bakhmut. Well, they may very well suffer greater casualties in their attempt to take Pokrovsk, and I don't think they will succeed.
No, I don't see it. When you look back on the quote breakthrough to the north And we've constantly been talking, especially around Kermena, where this is a Ukrainian tactic. You allow the Russians to advance in inane directions. Well, that strategy really showed its beginning, middle, and payoff in Pokrovsk, because you let the Russians advance in to the north, not to the south. They reinforced that salient, and it was a total waste of resources and life. I think within the next, let's say within 3 weeks, I don't think there's going to be anything left of those Russian pockets. And when you look at the 7 October map and you see the Ukrainian counterattacks to the east of the TO 515, I think we're going to see that portion of the salient also begin to be reduced. The Russians are already saying they're throwing more people into Pokrovsk. It's good money after bad, Alan. And it isn't just the low quality of the Russian Vatnik as a soldier. There are fundamental problems with their command and control, and let's just put it bluntly, the talent of their officers. They don't have any. This isn't tactics. It's murder. They're shipping people to the front who get greased.
Basically. Yep. That's what they did in Bakhmut. And you have to remember the forces in Bakhmut were largely part of the Wagner group, but also some of the most elite Russian units were rotated in at the end of the Battle of Bakhmut.
You know, and they were using their special operations forces who have capabilities and expertise that doesn't always include or can include charging machine gun nests. But if you train a guy for 24 months to do a variety of things, high altitude parachuting, mobile training teams, working in deep penetration and sabotage and strategic reconnaissance, and you chew them up like they did in Bakhmut. So it was a mistake. So Russia's special operations capability, look, they barely have one anymore. And we see the quality of the soldiers that they are mass producing. And by the way, they recruit 30,000 soldiers a month. They lose 30,000 soldiers. Month in, month out, it's unusual to see a day with less than 1,000 Russian casualties.
It is unusual. And even though the average is just under 1,000, I mean, there are plenty of days when the number of killed and wounded goes above 1,000. We want to move up to Kupiansk next. And I know that there are concerns about Kupiansk. Russians are using sewer lines and various pipes and tunnels to try to infiltrate into some of the neighborhoods of Kupiansk, the high town of Kupiansk. But I saw an interesting video the other day, a Russian soldier coming through a sewer pipe along with a wild boar.
When that thing scooted by him, that Russian must have been thinking, this is the biggest goddamn rat I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry it didn't go up his pants leg, actually. So this is the 6 October Kupiansk map here. And lest we all think, oh my God, they're taking half of Kupiansk. Let's kind of blow in. You can zoom in on this a little bit, folks, as you want. The western portion of Kupiansk is higher than the eastern portion. Now you can see the Russians actually have occupied a salient there to the south and west of the P79, but the money shot around here is the junction of the H-26 and the P79. I don't think they're going to get there. Now, although they have sort of advanced into the urban area and they are occupying these two little tendrils, look back and look at the open terrain through which the Russians have got to pass all their ground lines of communication and supply. So we have another example here of Ukraine allowing the Russians to gain disadvantageous terrain. The Russians have put people in there at great cost. And by that I mean if they send 100 guys forward to get into this salient, maybe 15 or 20 of them will make it. The others will perish. And of the guys who get in there, and I've talked about this before, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 magazines with six, so I got 600 rounds. That's big, right? Nobody carries that many, but we do. You could blow through that in an hour if you're in a bad situation. Okay, where are the guys in Kupiansk going to get more ammunition? So what I said about 80% casualties on the guys, same thing. You send in 100 pounds of bullets, you'll get maybe 20 through there. So this is a mortar and pestle operation. The Ukrainians are chewing these guys up. And as you can see, Ellen, with the series of drone strikes, they're decimating the logistics and the reinforcements who arrive on foot.
Yeah. Probably the only way for Russia to keep those troops in the neighborhoods of Kupiansk supplied would be by drone. And that limits the amount of supplies you can drop in to your force. It limits everything from water, food, ammunition, any medical supplies that the troops might request, because Russia actually doesn't have as capable heavy lift drones as Ukraine.
Right. And, when you're talking about payload, look, it would be a big deal for a Russian drone to deliver. Think about what a gallon of milk weighs. 2 gallons of water, right? Well, one soldier could drink 1 gallon of water at one. It's crazy. And I always talk about water, but you'd have to go without water for a couple of days to know how vital it is. And it's vital to a soldier. And we've already seen, look, the Russians have water problems just in the occupied territories in Luhansk and Donetsk. They don't have functional water treatment. They don't even have sewers that work anymore.
No.
Which leads to the question, that's how these guys are crawling through the sewer pipe. And again, look, crawling through a sewer pipe in wartime doesn't mean you're not going to get cholera, typhus, Shigella, whatever else is in the sewer pipes. That's why they're sewer pipes.
Right. Hopefully those soldiers will come down with all of those things. This 6 October map of Kupiansk also demonstrates how much this war has changed. And you can see the flurry of drone attacks over this Russian salient along the EP79. Ukraine didn't have such drone capability to keep the Russians out of the city of Bakhmut, for example. And that was only 2 years ago. This is now how much the war has changed because of drones, and Ukraine relying on drones. Really, I know people don't like the phrase drone wall of defense, but this is what Ukraine seeks to do, not only here in Kupiansk, but down in Pokrovsk and also around Chasiv.
Right. And the Ukrainians themselves are reporting credible numbers of drone production. They want to deploy 1 million FPV drones a year. And I think they're rapidly approaching that number. Right. So we talk to drone operators. Look, they're flying 6, 7, 10, 15 drone missions a day. We met with some drone operators. I won't even say the city now, but look, we were talking to these guys. And again, talk about the quality of the Russian Vatnik, right? You've got a criminal, you've got some 42-year-old guy, God bless him, really, I feel sorry for him, trying to enrich his family. We were talking to 2 privates in the Ukrainian army. They both had master's degrees in computer science. An operator, right? And the difference, the gradient in commitment patriotism, everything else, the gradient is steeply going to Ukraine. And it shows on the battlefield.
I remember you asking them, Chuck, if they didn't want to become commanders. They have the skills, they have the education in order to do that. Were you surprised by their answers?
You know, I wasn't, because I met a lot of guys like that in the SEAL teams. We had a lot of guys with even graduate degree. You know, every time I ask somebody, bring them into my office, I'd say, look, you got a master's degree. Why don't you go to OCS? I don't want to. You know, but these guys, their answer was more touching than that. They said, this is what I can do for my country, and I could do it better than anyone else. And this is where I belong. Wow. Not a guy in it for himself, not for the glory, not for the thrill of command. This is what I can do for my country. Amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing young men. Amazing.
They were amazing, and with such a clear sense of duty, and also such a clear understanding of the skills that they bring to the Ukrainian military team. They don't want a higher rank. They just want to use their skills to save their compatriots, to save Ukrainian infantry soldiers, especially, and to drive the Russians out of their country.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I remember that afternoon very clearly. I was incredibly impressed. Still am impressed, and I think we'll get to see them again. We'll get to meet them again.
I think we will, and we'll probably meet them back in the East again. Maybe this winter, maybe when the spring comes. Look, this is going to bring us, I think, pretty much to the close of the October 7 edition of Indications and Warnings. Chuck and I are aware that October 7 is the anniversary of the Hamas terror attack in Israel, but we are primarily focused on Ukraine. So if people expect us to review what's happening in Israel, that's not our job. Our sense of duty, just like those Ukrainian soldiers' sense of duty, is focused on Ukraine.
Right. This is our lane, folks, and I think everyone knows this is what we report on. We are against evil all over the world. We are against senseless killing. But our lane is to get the Russians out of Ukraine and to allow Ukraine the bright and prosperous future that its people are destined for. Just the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful countries I have ever been to. Alan, it was amazing. Imagine those beautiful countryside you've ever seen in the United States. Well, you're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't even get into the mountains.
We weren't in the mountains at all. I mean, there's nothing going on in the Carpathians, but believe some of our comrades had been there though, and I was jealous.
I was too, because they were more on vacation than we were.
They were. We definitely were not on vacation. But
look, if you like Indications and Warnings, if you benefit from Chuck's analysis and all of his maps, give us a like. Tell your friends and colleagues about Indications and Warnings, and talk about Ukraine from a base of knowledge that I hope you are able to take away from this program. Chuck and I have been described as slow talkers. We get a lot of advice. We need to pump up the show and that kind of thing. What I value about doing a show a few times a week with Chuck Pfarrer is the quality of conversation and the quality of knowledge that I take away from this association with you.
Well, Alan, you're the best media partner I ever had, and my battle buddy. And folks, we're going to be here till this is over. But look, I know I hate to say this, but help us beat the algorithm, right? Give us a like, click the whatever you're supposed to click. See, I don't even know. but we're here to help you make sense of this, and we want you to win your next cocktail party conversation. So please join us again. And Alan, you know what to say.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava. See you, folks.